Hey y'all, Darius Rucker here. You know, a lot of people ask me, what inspires your music? And one of the big things is a strong sense of place. That's why I love my home state of South Carolina and want to share the awesome things it has to offer. From the beautiful mountains down to the sunny coast, it's got it all. Not to mention two of my personal favorites, great golf and amazing food. Come see why I love this place. Visit discoversouthcarolina.com.
When you visit Arizona, time is measured in moments, not minutes. Like the moment you see the Grand Canyon for the first time. Visit a new state of mind. Learn more at hereyouareaz.com.
Okay, that was Steve Martin's Let's Get Small. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Volume
5
of Comedy Album Book Club. Thank you for being here. We here at the Social Capital Theater just listened to Steve Martin's album, Let's Get Small. So those you listening at home, I suggest you listen to the album before going any further. So this album was Steve Martin's first, and it came out in 1977. It was recorded at the Boarding House in San Francisco. It's 38 minutes and 10 seconds long. Other people who did performances at the Boarding House in San Francisco: Robin Williams, Lenny Bruce, Barbra Streisand, all these people while they were getting their start. Steve Martin did 3 more albums: A Wild and Crazy Guy in 78, Comedy's Not Pretty in 79, and then in 81 he did the Steve Martin Brothers. This album won the 1978 Grammy for Best Comedy Album, beating out Ernie Kovacs, George Carlin. Saturday Night Live actually put out an album that year, and Richard Pryor. Pretty impressive. Steve Martin did stand-up comedy for 18 years. In his words, he spent the first 10 learning, the next 4 refining, and the final 4 in wild success. And then he walked away from it. He said he never enjoyed doing the performances. He thought that would be indulgent to do so. It would take away his focus. He was a very focused comedian. And after he walked away, he ignored his stand-up career for 25 years until in 2007 when he wrote a memoir. That was 10 years ago. Steve Martin was born in 1945. He's now 72 years old. He's been in show business for more than 50 years. He's a comedian, musician. He's a writer, producer, and a playwright. His big break was on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in 1968. He was a writer on that show with people like Rob Reiner, Carl Gottlieb, Bob Einstein, and they gave him his break on television, and he did sort of a bad magician sort of act. I think it's the only clip in existence where he has brown hair and not white hair. And he was comedy's first superstar. He was the first comedian I ever heard. I was a big fan of his when I was a kid. My dad had a cassette tape of his second album, Wild and Crazy Guy, and I was a big fan of the movie version of Little Shop of Horrors, where he famously played the dentist. And then I went and played that character in grade 9 when I was 14, and still a pretty big highlight of my life. I should probably try to top that. It's been a long time. All right. So I have some guests here I'd like to bring up. The first guest, he has been doing comedy for 20 years, and he's been playing the character of Mullet, a zombie clown, for 18 years. And he's also part of the improv troupe Assface. Please welcome my feature guest who chose tonight's album, Alan Turner. Alan. How are you, Alan?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm great. I just listened to a Steve Martin album, man.
What a coincidence.
So did you. Assface, huh?
Yeah.
Where'd the name come from for that, for your improv troupe?
I just made it up.
All right, good story. All right. My second guest tonight is a very funny comedian, and you can follow her on Twitter at the other K West, not to be confused with Kanye, for all her upcoming show dates. Please welcome Katie Westman. Katie. Or is it Westman? Did I say it right?
Westman, yeah.
Westman, okay. So, Katie, how long have you been a comedian?
4 years now.
4 years now. Okay,
Yeah.
So you're almost done.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Good
it's
for
about
you.
time.
What do you got? You got something coming up you want to talk about? You got some some date. This will come out a week today, so.
Are we? No, I don't know my next show dates. I'll have them all
Okay.
in like 2 weeks. So
All right.
sorry.
Well, people listening to this at home or live, check out at the other K West on her
I
Twitter.
didn't. I didn't get any plug at all.
Well, you missed. You gave up your chance, man. I was asking about.
What?
Okay.
I
when's-
didn't use mine. If it's fair.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. You can take Katie's. What's your next thing coming up?
No, I got nothing.
All right. Fair. It was worth the wait. Okay. And my third guest today has been a comedian in Toronto for some time, and he also hosts the No Wrong Answers podcast. He's putting together a best of album called the Some of the People, Some of the Time collection. Please welcome Dave Martin. Dave's got what looks like a jug of diarrhea under his
Whatever
arm.
gets you through the night. I'm quite good. I'm
Well,
quite
you
good.
have a
thank you.
portable toilet? It's that cold outside that you.
It is that cold
yeah,
outside.
fair
Yes.
enough.
There's
It
my
is-
improv skills. Yes, they are. Whatever you say.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's the improv slogan, right? Yes, they are. No
Yes.
matter what someone says, you say, yes, they are. All right. Well, welcome to all three of you.
I like you didn't actually have the years I've actually been a comedian. You just said some time.
But you wouldn't tell me. I asked you this.
Oh, did you ask me? Did you actually ask me how long I've been doing this?
I don't know. I asked everyone to give me a bio, and it was pretty disappointing what the answers were. Okay, Dave, how long have you been a comedian?
It's
Well,
more
let-
disappointing that it's been 20 years. Trust me.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, you're getting fancy shirts like this. You're making the 20-year. Sorry, you listeners at home can't see this. There's some paisley, there's some plaid, there's some flowers, there's every color I've ever seen.
Yeah, and that's just one collar.
Ba-dum-bum.
Fancy
Looks like a
as
number.
a
Looks like a
stretch.
number of
That's
shirts
what
all
we're
just sewn together.
Well, it's all my previous shirts that I've ever worn. That's the thing. 20 years in comedy, and you start recycling material and shirts.
So tomorrow you'll be wearing this shirt with one more shirt added to it in some way. Every day you just add one.
Yeah,
more shirt
yours,
in some
yours.
way. Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Whenever you're on a show, you take the host's shirt and add it to your shirt.
Yes,
And you
there
gain all
you
their
are.
powers. Fair enough. Okay, I'm terrified and confused, but that's nothing new. Okay, how long you been doing comedy, Dave?
Let's say
Since it's
pre.
important to you.
We'll just say pre 9/11. That's what I.
That's a
divide
that looks
everything
great
down.
on a resume. Yeah, I've been a comedian since 9/11. Slightly before.
I would say probably like 96-ish, 97-ish.
That's quite a ways before.
It is quite a
9/11,
ways. Yeah, I have.
There's a lot of other milestones you could pick besides 9/11. I'm sure.
Well, no, I mean, I just, but I'd say, yeah, I'd say
21st
probably
century
around
comedian.
96, 97 is when I started taking it seriously.
So 22.
That's so
years.
long. You must have so many shirts on your shirt.
I do have quite a few. Yeah,
So many
I think I'm going to rip them all into fours and make brand new shirts out of all of them, like you've done.
But if you take my shirt now, that exponentially,
I'm not
your
gonna take the
will
shirt off
Is
your
that an
back.
option?
Well, yeah. We're at the end of the night. We fight for each other's clothing.
Oh, I see. I didn't know it worked that way. I wouldn't have worn just a plain black sweater.
You're not a professional comedian, are you?
Clearly not. No,
I thought we throw all the clothes in one pile and then we all just dive into the pile and then just take whatever clothes we want.
Well, that is what happens, but I thought it was a fight. You might think it's loving in the shirt pile. It's your own perspective.
I thought it was just a big game of scrambles with clothing.
Well, either way, we're walking away with clothes.
Welcome
hope
to
so.
Comedy Album Book Club Volume 5. Folks, we're going to start this over. My first guest is Alan Turner. This is fascinating. No, really. Alan, you chose tonight's album.
Yes.
Why?
Because Steve Martin is one of my favorite comedians and certainly has had a huge, huge influence on me. And this is his first album and continues. All his albums are great, but you said to play the first one. No, I chose the first one because this one was the first one I listened to. He's a huge influence on me, but I came to him late. I didn't listen to his stuff as a kid, as we'll discover some of our other panelists did. So I think I consciously found the first one and listened to it first, and then listened to them in. You just put lumbar support. I think that's a sign I should cut this answer short.
No. I needed to get comfortable. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. You're talking a long time. Let me put my lumbar support behind my.
I didn't say that out loud. The people listening to the podcast would never have known if you hadn't called it out.
Yeah, but now they know it's a visual experience. They're at home imagining what this is.
They don't.
would've- they
yeah,
would've figured
and you
it
didn't-
out.
What was that, Katie?
They would have figured it out.
You think they would have heard it in my voice, right? A bit more pride, a bit more comfort.
Alan, what do you think about this album? Actually, I want to call attention to how this night is set up. It's pretty wild that we all come together to listen to a comedy album. I'll tell you that I never did that before. This was the first time that I've listened to a comedy album
with other people.
With other people, I always thought, you hear stories, you listen to interviews with comedians about, we always got around, put the record on, and smoked dope and listened to comedy albums. It was a great time, and I thought, that sounds communal and fun, and I guess I'm lonely. I never did that, so I was excited that
This
we
is
do
an
it.
intervention. This whole show is just to make
get
you
me
feel,
out more?
Yeah.
As long as you're...
Surprise!
We're so worried about you.
Okay, well, be worried still, because here we are, and this is what I want to call it. We're all together listening to comedy album, but the way this room is set up is we're still in a theater with all our chairs facing towards the stage in the dark with no one on stage.
Yes.
And we didn't look at each other or
No.
share that laugh. But just as they're imagining you with lumbar support, I think we all were imagining, it was very easy to imagine Steve Martin on stage. We could fill him with our mind's eye because it's such a visual album to listen to.
Well, yeah, that's kind of interesting. In my mind, that makes it not necessarily a great comedy album. I mean,
good night.
He's actually walking off the stage. I love him. I love this album, but technically speaking, there's some stuff that we might be missing. There's a part in where he's talking about, one time I was small and I was driving down the street like this.
He didn't actually get small. You didn't miss out on...
I wanted to see how he got small. That's his whole thing. How does this? He's the only man who can get small.
Well, in his book, he wrote the book that you mentioned, where he specifically, it's an autobiography, but he specifically focuses on his
On his
coming to
stand-up,
stand-up, yeah.
and he
And
talks
his
about
magic. I'm reading it right
That's
now.
right, yeah. It's fantastic.
It's halfway through and it hasn't progressed past his magic yet.
Wow. I recommend the audiobook. He narrates it.
Yeah, are you reading it or are you listening to the audio?
I'm reading it. Yeah.
I read it myself, so.
Good for you, Dave.
I like to get other people to read them for me sometimes, but I decided to read this book on my own.
Ouch.
If you had gotten the audiobook, now it sounds like we're doing a commercial, but we are talking.
It's available
about
on
him
Audible.
nonstop. But he reads it himself and then he plays banjo in between the chapters. But
Yeah.
what's really fascinating is sometimes he's quoting his old material, like jokes that he does the plumber joke that we just listened to on the album. But you're getting, and he does the scripted joke, but he doesn't revert entirely into stand-up Steve, but he can't help but go back into some of that old cadence in the
Yeah.
delivery, and you
Yeah.
get this
It's fun to hear
alternate
him do
take
it.
of him
Yeah.
doing stand-up now, which he doesn't do a lot of in the audiobook version. It's really neat to hear.
Well, I always thought, whenever he hosts like an award show, like he's done the Oscars a number of times, or the Grammys or whatever award show. That is basically him doing stand-up.
But a different style, right? Like
definitely,
it's
yeah.
very dry and not any of this goofy stuff. Really, he's really transformed into this kind of presenter that he is. He seems to take himself more seriously these days.
You know, that makes me but that makes me think of someone totally different, John Lydon or Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols, right? So he did the Sex Pistols when he was 19, and then he went on to do Public Image Limited, which he continues to write and perform with. And in an interview, and I'm going to bastardize the quote, but the gist of it was, where else do you hold a person to the person that they were at 19? So when you're in the spotlight, it seems that you're frozen in time. You're not allowed to grow and evolve.
They say once you become famous, you don't mature anymore. That you have to be who the society sort of expects you to be. You
Whereas
don't get a
maybe
chance to
Steve
grow.
Martin has transcended that.
Yeah.
And maybe lots of other people like John Lydon and et cetera, are transcending that. And then it's up to the audience to... I don't know what I'm saying. It's up to the audience. I don't know. It's up to the audience to do what the audience is going to do.
Yeah, this all came out of my comment that I wish I got to see him get small.
Well, he talks about in that book.
Well, he says he holds his hands up like he's driving the car, and that's the thing that we miss that people are laughing at. He's like, I'm small, driving in the car.
But he talked about in his book that was one of the concerns with recording this.
I just did that
album.
same thing for my podcast. I just realized that. I just
yeah.
He's like this. I've learned nothing in the 40 years since this album came out.
But there was concern that his act was getting more. Well, not concern. He was excited that his act was getting more and more physical.
Right.
But there was concern coming from somewhere, the label, perhaps I don't remember, that perhaps it was so physical that it wouldn't translate to the record. But he was excited for that as well, so that there are these gaps left on the record.
Yeah.
And
I thought the whole thing was a prank at first, like listening to it. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be all like visual jokes, and then, like we're all just suckers for like listening to the album.
When did
like,
you
I wish
first?
it was there.
When did you first hear it, Katie?
Last week.
Oh wow. Okay. Cool.
So, but I remember some, like I've heard snippets of his stuff, and it always felt like that. Like I don't like the joke that's not a joke. Like that's a lot of his stuff.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about what he's doing. That I'm performing, I'm a comedian, and you're at the show, and you're a bunch of suckers. And
yeah,
and it's always interesting to me when I talk to people who haven't heard his comedy. I say, oh yeah, Steve Martin's one of my comedy heroes. And they're like, really? Like the Cheaper by the Dozen guy? The Father of the Bride too? And I'm like, well, yeah, he did. He was, pretty avant-garde for the time. And a lot of the stuff is very silly, but very polished in its way too. And very new. It's not the observational humor at all that most comedians were doing, and not the political stuff that like people like Lenny Bruce were doing. It was just let's have a good time.
Well, I mean, that was one of the things that I think Steve Martin sort of really embraced, because he said a lot of the, like when he started to do stand-up, there was sort of in the early 70s, there was a very serious tone to everybody. It was like, there was like George Carlin, and there was Richard Pryor, and it was like a big political message into a lot of people's stand-up. And that's one of the things that Steve Martin always wanted to embrace. He just like the silliness and just the goofiness of doing stand-up. And I just like, even this whole album, even from the very beginning, he's just having fun and playing with every sort of awkward showbiz cliche of just that, like, all right, how's everybody doing tonight? Immediately, it's just it's like he doesn't take himself seriously at any point on this record, and but he's very much an established comedian. He did numerous TV appearances, and he's probably guest hosted the Tonight Show a number of times. Probably even at this point when this album comes out, and he basically, I guess, he took maybe 2 years off because he has this one's from '77, then '78, and then '79, and then the other one in '81.
Right,
and you can tell on the Steve Martin Brothers album, you can tell that he's very, very. He just does not give a shit about doing stand-up much anymore. I mean, the whole first track because the Steve Martin Brothers, there's one side that's stand-up, and then the other side is basically is all banjo music. And the first track on that one is just he's just giving the audience a big FU. It's like he doesn't really care. I mean, he cares, but he doesn't like. Doesn't feel like he has to prove himself anymore on that record.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, do you think it's that he doesn't care, or that the evolution of this character he's playing, that not caring, this larger than life showbiz character? Because that's what I was going to.
Even this first album, it's very much a character he's playing.
It's
like
character
like
comedy.
Dave says, he doesn't take himself seriously, but the character he's playing does. He's got that overconfidence, and I'm the best showman in the world, and the joke is that he's a bad showman. Yeah,
and there's a weird well, I want to ask the question, but there's a paradox there in that it sounds like he's not taking himself seriously, whereas during the day, he would have been going to art galleries and on the road alone and thinking about the material and honing it just as technically as other established other comedians you hear about. To come across as so cavalier and not caring. So my question to you is, do you think some of Steve's disillusionment with it is seeping through, or is it an evolution of that character into just, I can get away with murder up here?
I think it's more along this the evolution of just I can get away with murder up here. I can do whatever I want. Because one of the reasons why he said he left stand-up was just he felt that like he was playing to stadiums. He was playing to like just arenas, and he left because he basically felt like no one was really listening to him anymore. And half the reason he said that he was wearing the white suit was just so more people could see him on stage. And he felt like he was basically at the end just hosting a party and no one was actually listening to what he was doing. So that was one of the reasons why he kind of walked away from it. It was just, he was like, it was basically just more and more material, and he didn't feel like he needed to prove himself anymore.
He almost became too popular for his own enjoyment type of thing, because he became almost a catchphrase machine. I mean, in this album, even we hear him saying the "excuse me" thing, and he was just famous from doing that,
which people might not
shows.
Realize.
It's a huge catchphrase.
He originated that.
Yeah, right.
So that
right.
crossed over and became a catchphrase. But now it's still, you'll still hear it. Not
it's more a boomer
but people
thing,
have no idea that it came from him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he debuted that on Saturday Night Live, that character saying the "excuse me," and I think on Saturday Night Live doing stand-up, he did the "Let's Get Small" bit before this album, and the King Tut thing he debuted on Saturday Night Live too a little bit later, and then that appeared on his.
Well, I didn't debut it on
album.
there, but I'm not sure you want me to contradict you.
No, please do.
Well, he didn't.
Okay.
Where did he debut it?
Well, I know it's on the second album, but that wasn't the first time it was.
No, and it was
performed.
released before that second album came out as a 78 single. 78
Okay.
or 45. Anyway, it came out as a single.
And then he performed that on Saturday Night Live?
And then, on Saturday, it was already a big hit because it had been out on a single, and then they put it out on the album, and then by the time they got to Saturday Night Live, he was re-envisioning it with the whole, I think it was the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band they brought in.
Right.
Band behind.
Yeah,
so
and
that was
that
an
was
elevated version of something he'd already been doing on tour
Okay.
for a while.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was.
I didn't bring notes, but, whatever.
Except for me. Yeah, we'll edit that part out that I didn't know.
How would you complain about that to anyone? Be like, I think I'm just like too popular, Like I got too good.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, he seems like the kind of guy that he wanted to do new stuff and great stuff, and it almost felt like the celebrity and the popularity of it was secondary. It seemed like the work was the most important thing to him, and then when that sort of became a cliche, he didn't get the same thing out of it. He wasn't pushing the envelope.
Well, when you hear Andy Kaufman, you still hear a lot of people talking about Andy Kaufman, and especially now with Jim and Andy on Netflix. And I say now, knowing that people are listening to this hundreds of years in the future.
Right. Assuming it's still on Netflix, and Netflix is still a thing.
Well, it got bought out by Coreblog.
Yeah,
but
right. All hail Coreblog.
oh hell. But Steve Martin preceded Andy in that he was doing things like after the show he would bring the audience out to McDonald's to buy fries, or he tells a story again in the he talks about it in his book. That he would take people out and then crowd surf over them in an empty swimming pool and things like that. But as the audiences are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, just like you say, he wasn't able to explore this.
Yeah.
So he was restricted to just being on stage in front of a stadium audience, and it became uninteresting for him.
Well, I think he just felt like he didn't have anything to prove anymore. It's just like, where do you go after you've headlined, Maple Leaf Gardens? Or
I'd
Madison
I'd go
Square
back
Garden.
to the open mics.
That's where you would
Yeah.
go? But
Yeah.
and no one would be like, oh, I wonder what he's going to do. But
That's easy to say, Katie, without having an album go platinum that you would
I'll
go
let
back
you
to.
know. when.
Yeah, please do. It won't be long. Please let us know.
Yeah, Katie said she's done 4 years. It was the 4 years in wild success.
That's right. She's
Yeah.
doing it
She
backwards.
just skipped to those 4 years.
All the shitty bits. I didn't do that. Just
But also in the book, Steve talks about, being crippled by depression and anxiety, and how that was part of it too, and how, like I said before, he didn't necessarily enjoy the show. He thought that was indulgent, but when the show was over, he would spend hours and hours either feeling incredible or feeling terrible, depending on how the show went. And he was a very, self-critical person.
Well, I mean, that's sort of the classic stand-up sort of mentality of just like, I mean, Katie knows this probably. Of like, you can have an amazing show, and some stranger will want to come up to you and just give you a compliment about, oh, hey, what a great time we had. What a great show. And then there's that part. Comics need to sort of train themselves to just be like, oh, thank you very much. Thank you for coming to the show. Glad you had a good time. But usually the first thing that most comics want to say after someone says, hey, great show, most of the time we want to say, yeah, you know what, it was all right, but there was this one bit that I was really trying. And then people just get this look on their face of just like, oh, why can't you just say thank you? And we can end this relationship right now. Because we're always thinking about how we could have screwed up, or how we screwed up and we didn't do the one thing that we wanted to do. And it's that, it's.
And you end up wrecking their experience for them.
Exactly.
They had an amazing time.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe it wasn't that good. Thanks.
You brought up Andy Kaufman, and if you ever want to see a cringeworthy clip, it's Steve Martin is hosting The Tonight Show, and Andy Kaufman is the guest on it. And those two clearly do not get along. Because I always think there's a bit of a sort of a revisionist history when it comes to Andy Kaufman that I think that a lot of people sort of look back on him and go like, oh man, he was reading The Great Gatsby and to the whole audience, and if someone interrupted him, he would start from the beginning again. Well, isn't that hilarious? Isn't that great? And I think that's funny to look back on, but I think if you actually went to an Andy Kaufman show, and I think Steve Martin did have a huge respect for the audience, and I don't know if sometimes Andy Kaufman would just like to, if it wasn't going well, he would just sort of stick a knife in and twist it around a little bit more to almost make it worse for them. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, Steve Martin is sort of almost playing his character is almost the guy who thinks he's bombing all the time and is constantly trying to recover from it and doing these over-the-top, is like, oh, aren't we having some fun now? So I think that's where Steve Martin and Andy Kaufman didn't see eye to eye on things. I think Steve Martin wanted to make the crowd happy, and Andy Kaufman was like, we're here for an experience more than a comedy show. Because I think if you went to go see Andy Kaufman and he did do the Great Gatsby thing, I think you'd be like, what the fuck is this? I'm not enjoying this. Where's the funny? To me,
Andy Kaufman is like the beat poet of comedians, just sort of self-indulgent, doing his own thing and hoping people are along with the ride. And if they don't, they're.
I mean, I do like Andy Kaufman. I do. I
like
love
him too, but I don't hold him in the same regard as Steve Martin because, like you said, he respects the audience. I think Steve Martin is, even though he's sort of playing this over-the-top jerk of a showman, he is a showman, and he wants to put on a show. And I think he probably learned a lot of that from working on the Smothers Brothers and implementing fantastic musical ability with comedy. Like the Smothers Brothers were the kings of that.
Well, and Jason, it makes me think of the first question that you asked about why this album, and it's such a great example of something that's seemingly going off the rails, and this character that is seemingly failing in many ways. But as we've been talking about, Steve under the character is not. He's serious. He's crafting setups and punchlines. He's playing with the rhythm and the release of tension and trying to take tried and true formulas in different directions. He's avant-garde, like you said. He's experimenting with anti-comedy, which is something new at that time.
He's counting tits.
Yeah. But the
how would you define anti-comedy?
This podcast. No.
Oh.
Hey now.
Well, it's been great having you, Alan Turner.
I'm gonna go. But no, anti-comedy. The idea that it's that's a hard one to define. Funny in spite of itself, or I don't.
Well, he's playing with all the cliches,
Yeah.
He's sort of undercutting the pillars of comedy, right? Like sort of calling out what the cliches are.
Yeah.
While still them being.
But
funny.
that's where I'm trying to go with this is that the failure is not true. So Fozzie Bear of the Muppets, right?
Familiar,
terrible comedian.
Hey,
right?
come on, Ian.
But we watch Fozzie Bear, and
it's okay, Dave.
we
it's okay.
groan
Let's
at
see where he
his
goes.
jokes, but we love Fozzie Bear, and we love watching Fozzie Bear fail. We never go, oh, that Frank Oz is a terrible puppeteer. He should really get into directing or something. So again, it goes back to why this album and why he's a huge influence on me personally is that idea of walking the razor's edge of failure and making a character appear to fail, but you under the character are not failing. And so the failure is entertaining to watch. And that motivates a lot of clown performances. You mentioned
I was just going to say that
and
obviously
particularly what I'm
informs-
doing with Mullet. So
Yeah,
that's
most
a
of your
huge
shows
person.
are failures, I would say.
Well, yeah, that's why I have this shirt. We already got into that. Well, anyway, that's an answer to their first question. Do you have a second question for
I
the
don't know
panel?
if we have time for a second question.
But it's like on the plumber joke, the fact that the plumbers aren't there and the audience is like, it's the funny part is him going into all this detail, and then when the joke falls flat, that's where the punchline is. So the fact that it's not the
Right.
success of the joke is the funny part, where that's sort of like, I guess that's sort of a definition of anti-comedy.
That's a good example
of where
from that
like
album
the
of
failure, the
anti-comedy, for
screw up
sure.
is the funny part, and I think there's so much actually from this album and Wild and Crazy Guy too that I know other comics have sort of taken from, and just that idea of like, I'm going to go off in a long direction of nowhere, and then that'll be like the more detailed is the funnier it gets. You know.
Do you feel any of you have borrowed directly or indirectly from Steve Martin?
Sure, definitely. So long as
Just
that's
a
not
yes or
me
no
and-
answer. That's
Well, as long as I'm not admitting to.
to thievery.
Did you steal from Steve Martin? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Katie?
Yeah, after listening to the album, I realized a lot of just kind of the structure of some of my jokes are very much Steve Martin like, and I wasn't very familiar with his stuff growing up, but
Can you
I
give an
realized
example?
we were talking about like the fail of the joke. I tell a lot of failed jokes, and yeah, when we were just talking about that, I remember I used to do, and it's kind of like a dirty joke, and it's too much detail, and the punchline is like, "Ooh, that didn't work. I'll save it for junior highs," and that's where the joke is.
Right.
But I don't think it's directly from Steve Martin, but indirectly, I mean, I think so many people when you're growing up watching different comedy and reading comics and different things like that, I think a lot of it really is, influenced by your favorites. And I think if I looked back now, some like the comics I read, things like that, I could probably pick out which ones also like Steve Martin.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, just the structure and a lot of the jokes I realized, or the delivery sometimes I thought I could pinpoint a lot of comics I know who do that and probably don't realize they do
You
that.
can get away with a lot with self-deprecation, I find.
Yeah.
Audiences really enjoy that. And this is an interesting character that Steve plays in that he's self-deprecating without sort of being a party to it.
Yeah.
Like, he sort of doesn't realize, the character he's playing doesn't realize that he's failing. Like, as you
Aw,
said.
man, I don't know how to do
Just the ignorance is bliss throughout his whole act. Yeah, I like that.
Thoughts, Dave?
Oh, well, probably the first two comedy albums I had were the Wild and Crazy Guy on cassette, and then George Carlin's Class Clown. So I listened to those constantly, and probably, I guess, cadence-wise, I would get a lot mostly from George Carlin, and I love the silly stuff of Steve Martin. But there was a character that I did for maybe about 3 or 4 years that basically stems off of the plumber joke. And this basically the notion that, when a comedian feels like that everything he's talking about is so relatable, but clearly it's not.
Right.
And so I did a character for a while where he was basically a washed-up comedian and who was addicted to glue. So he would come on stage, and the character was Glue Guy, and so a bit of a thing from when Chris Elliott would show up on the Letterman's first show, and every character he played was just something guy.
Right.
He would be the fugitive guy, and he'd be running around through the steps and stuff, or guy underneath the stairs. So I had a character called Glue Guy, and basically every joke, the punchline was had to do with glue. So just implying that it was just everyone can relate to this, right? You want to know what I hate about women? They're always trying to take your glue away, huh, fellas? So I'd be in a tuxedo, and it looked like I'd been rolling around in dirt the whole time, and and I would have Vaseline on my face, so it looked like I was just sweating profusely. My hair was everywhere, and
That feels like a little bit maybe of Tony Clifton.
a little bit,
influence,
but
maybe.
it's a little bit not. Well, I mean, but Andy Kaufman would live as Tony Clifton.
True,
and
yeah.
I couldn't wait to get out of character.
Right.
When it came to that, but I mean, Glue Guy was a character that sort of stemmed from that plumber joke where Steve just is like talking to the crowd, believing under the impression everyone can relate to this, or I'm going to just play to the 30 plumbers that I think are here, and so Glue Guy was probably stemmed from that sort of that particular character.
How was that received?
You know what? I would do it at alternative venues, like when the Rivoli on Monday night was alternative venue, and if I would do it in front of the right crowd, and of course, obviously, if you do it in front of the right crowd, it would kill, it would destroy.
Right.
But
Did the right crowd ever show up?
Oh yeah, no, a bunch of times. It went over well quite often. But then there were times where I would do it at Yuck Yucks and in front of like 400 people, and I would just bomb horribly for 7 minutes.
Yes.
And it was such an elaborate get-up that at no point could I just sort of wipe the shit off my face and just be like, hey, sorry, everybody, I'm just playing a character up here. It was the thing,
every bit as that character had to be glue.
Well, then I would do a couple of hacky jokes of just like, hey, the other day I had a mail order for a penis enlarger. It comes in the mail. It's a magnifying glass. Are you right? So the purposely horrible jokes. But,
and then I spilled glue on it.
Yeah, right. And it's so, and so there would be jokes that would just be just bad that I would just sort of. But if I would do it at the when Clinton's used to have their pirate video cabaret a million years ago, or if I would do it at the Rivoli, or if I would
mentioned
do it,
alternative. How would you define alternative comedy? What's an alternative comedy?
Well, I think Steve Martin's one of the most original alternative comics because he's playing off the standard cliches of the MC and the show business and all these sort of gags.
Would you say it's often character work? Alternative comedy?
I think so. As much as. Yeah, I would say it is. There's comedians that you watch on stage, and afterwards you feel like you know them as a person, but even like Seinfeld, they're all observations, and you don't ever really get to know him as a person. But if you see a guy, a number of other comedians, you sort of watch them, and at the end of the show, you feel like, oh, I think I know that guy a little bit.
Would Sam Kinison be alternative comedy?
No,
Does he yell all the time?
Well, no. I
want a cup of coffee.
I think Sam Kinison was a great comic. I don't know if he necessarily holds up after his first album as a comedian because he's a guy who suffered from becoming way too famous and people just came to see him scream.
Yeah, well, I just wonder if that would be defined as
mode.
alternative because it's sort of character-esque.
Yeah, well, it was, but I think that not to the level that Steve Martin was a alternative comic.
How come I had to answer that question yes or no?
Because we know that
you wouldn't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You didn't. All right, that's a good place to take a break, folks. We're going to have a little bathroom break, beer break. We're going to take some questions from the audience, and then we'll come back and answer them and continue with Comedy Album Book Club.
Comedy Album Book Club is recorded live on the first Thursday of every month at the Social Capital Theatre in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Join us, won't you? We listen to the album at 9:30 p.m. and then we record the panel discussion for the podcast. Tickets are pay what you can, with some proceeds going to Covenant House, Canada's largest agency for at-risk, homeless, and trafficked youth. For more details, please visit us at comedyalbumbookclub.com. I'm Jason Deline. Thanks for listening.
All this anxiety just rushed up into him, boom, all at once. And,
That's how I feel right now.
Welcome to the second half of Comedy Album Book Club. We got some questions from the audience here. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Do you think Steve is the best ever Oscars host? And in brackets, correct answer is yes. It's a slightly slanted question. You don't have to answer yes, I guess. We'll see what happens. Hopefully they don't get too mad. But, let's start with you, Katie. What do you think? Have you seen him host the Oscars?
No, I haven't. Sorry.
Okay.
I haven't watched a lot of the Oscars.
Yes, big yes from you?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
He's hosted, 3 times, I think, and then once with Alec Baldwin. Is that right? Or maybe twice?
Did he do it with Alec Baldwin?
Yeah,
it was
he
the 1 year that he
co-hosted with Alec
another.
Baldwin 1 year. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I think he's easily in the top 3, but you can't really say Steve Martin doing what Billy Crystal does when he hosted the Oscars.
Well, yeah, he brought his own flavor to it for sure, all the musical numbers and everything like that. What do you think, Ellen?
I haven't seen a lot of Oscars, but I did watch his opening monologue, and I thought it was really subversive in a way that something like Seth MacFarlane's was not, where it seemed it was more overtly like, oh, isn't this naughty? Whereas Steve Martin was getting by. Well, more than getting by, he was successful at it, and people were enjoying it while he was so he was doing the gig. It was a job, and he was doing the gig, and he did it very well, and made it enjoyable while simultaneously undercutting celebrity culture in a way that I thought was legitimately subversive.
I mean, I think it's the kind of gig that you're almost set up to fail in a certain way because you're being compared to every other host that was before you, and nobody exactly is like. Is there one sort of most amazing?
Well, Bob Hope is arguably one of the best, I would say.
Yeah, but I mean, did Bob Hope did he come? I mean, I've never watched Bob Hope do it before, but I mean, did he come out? Did he?
Well, he's
did he
charming
have
and funny.
bits, or did he have
He
gags? or
CGI'd
sketches
himself
and-
into all the movies.
Did he do
came
that
out
first?
year.
Yeah. He put himself in the Charlie
Road.
the Road.
With Viggo Mortensen.
Yeah.
Viggo Mortensen and Bob Hope in The Road.
I would watch. That's a road movie I would watch. I love the song and dance number in the third act is a little indulgent but entertaining. Viggo can dance. So yeah, yes. The answer is yes. Steve Martin's the best. We got to the bottom of that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, who else was great? Crystal, as you mentioned. I actually really liked when Letterman hosted it that year. I thought that was a really different type of show, and it was funny. And,
Yeah, I think.
but there's still a formula to the whole thing, and it's written by other people. I mean, it's just if you're comfortable doing it or not, and they try to write to the personality of the host. I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
But also, it's one of those shows where people almost. It's the kind of show where people almost don't want you to be the person that you are. It's like when Chris Rock hosted it, he was getting booze for jokes that it's like, I'm sorry, but you asked for Chris Rock. This is what he's gonna, if you wanted him, then he's gonna be himself. I mean, even there were people that didn't like Letterman's performance because he was almost being too Letterman-ish.
Yeah. Well, people see someone who's successful and they think, oh, they will do great fitting into our mold. Like the guys who did the Lego movie. They were hired to write and direct the Han Solo movie coming out. And they got fired in the 11th hour because they made it too funny, and they brought in Ron Howard. And like, well, what did you expect? Why did you hire these guys if you didn't want them to do the thing they're great at?
Yeah. You mean came out hundreds of years ago, All Hail Korbog.
Oh, yes, All Hail Korbog, yes. Yeah. All right, archive tape number 75. This is from 2018. I don't know, this joke, I don't know if it's working, but we're committed. Okay,
Just say
next,
yes. Just say yes.
Next question from the audience. This is a statement and then a question. The lack of visuals has been mentioned. We talked about how there's a lot of physical comedy in the album compared to so many recorded performances today. Do you think the purely audio comedy album will make a comeback like vinyl? Right, because vinyl has sort of had a resurgence. People collect records again. Will the audio comedy album make a comeback? That's an interesting question. The last show we did was Adam Sandler's debut album, which I think was from 1993. They're All Gonna Laugh at You, and we were sort of struck by how it wasn't a stand-up comedy album. It was a sketch comedy album, and the sound design on it was incredible, and they didn't use sound effects libraries. They created their own Foley, their own effects, and it really had a rich soundscape. And I credit Sandler with sort of bringing a resurgence of interest in audio as far as comedy. He was one of the younger people to be doing a comedy album at that time in the early 90s. And now we have sort of radio plays and audio dramas happening again. People are listening to podcasts, and I don't know. Is this a new renaissance of audio? Are people paying more attention to that? When you listen to a podcast, you try not to talk about visuals. I think a lot of comedy albums now aren't as visual. What do you guys think? Are we leaning more towards the audio again as an art form?
Well, I think what I'm doing with my hands right now answers that best.
I mean, even though I can see it, I find it confusing. So I don't know how the listeners will piece that together.
I'm offended at what you're doing with your arms right now, actually.
Yeah.
I can't believe in today's climate that you would actually keep doing that.
Well, from
Even
your
as we're-
angle, Dave, I think you're seeing something a little more perverse than what I'm seeing.
From my perspective, yeah. I don't know if everyone else can see what I'm seeing.
It's not really
but-
accessible to everyone, I don't think, Alan.
Well, I think there's definitely a boom in comedy albums now. I think mostly because that you can self-release one. That sounded kind of creepy, but you can put out your own album so quickly. You can get an H6 recorder. You can set up a bunch of mics at a club, and you can edit a whole album together, and you can put it out on iTunes all on your own.
But that doesn't make it good. That doesn't mean you've
of course
crafted
it
an
doesn't
audio
make it good.
experience.
I'm just saying that's if there's
It can be
a
done.
resurgence in comedy albums.
Yeah.
Half of it I think has to be because it's so much easier to make one now.
Right. But I mean,
Doesn't mean that you should make one either.
but do you think comics are cognizant of that fact that people are going to be listening to it? If they make an album, do they try to write it for the ear?
Yeah.
Is that part? Like, do you guys do that? Like, when you're writing, like, is there part of you that thinks some people are only ever going to hear this?
Writing.
No, but you would pick different jokes for an album than you
Right.
would do in a set. That's why I like Steve Martin's, because he has such a wide variety of material he could choose to do for an album. It's like, no, I'm going to do these specifically very visual jokes. And I like that he chooses to do that.
You think that was a conscious choice?
Yeah, I think so.
As you mentioned earlier, you thought it was kind of a joke to.
I think, it probably was brought up to him by, I don't know, agent or something
Yeah.
like that, and just decided to stick with him.
I
It
just
adds to
assumed
the story,
this
but I
is
think
the
it's
set that
another level for
kills.
him.
Yeah, I just figured like this is my best material.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to put my best material on an album. But like I like the idea that he actually thought this will be funny if I do this visual thing.
Well,
Yeah,
in the
like a
book-
little joke for him almost, thinking like
Right.
this
And
is
they
this
did
is being
think about
recorded
it.
right now. Yeah.
And the
I think
fallout
I-
of it was that it drove more people to the concerts because people wanted to
They
know
wanted to
what
see.
they were missing.
Oh, that's an interesting marketing ploy.
So if you come to this podcast next month, you'll see what I did with my hands.
Oh, you don't. You
We're
didn't-
going to show a tape of what you did next month?
or he'll just stand on stage and do what he's doing.
They'll just do it again? You're going to come back and reenact just the
horrible
hand
things.
movements and then leave?
Oh, I've been invited.
God.
Yeah,
Damn
you-
it. You
you-
got me again, Turner.
You've been invited by me. Yes. I don't know if it was that sort of like. I don't know if he put that much thought into it. I think it was more along the lines of just like I'm recording a set, and if the jokes kill in the recording, he's going to put them on the album. And I'm trying to think of how long he actually did stand up before he was sort of like, I guess I should put an album out now. But
Well,
as opposed to
started,
most comics now who are just sort of like, hey, I got enough time. I'll just put out an album no matter what.
Well, he'd been doing stand-up since 67, and 77 was his first album. So,
Yeah.
So 10 years.
That's probably what it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But most
Yeah.
comics now, because like
Oh,
I said,
sure.
you can just release your own record on iTunes.
Right.
They're after a year or two, they're sort of like, hey, I'll put this out on that album.
Yeah, the more I think about it, Katie, I think the more that makes sense. Like, someone who's spent this much time crafting that, like, you would think he would know that it would be a missed opportunity if he accidentally put an audio-based comedy. And this is also more than 10 years after people like Nichols and May and Bob Newhart, who are featured in previous episodes of this podcast, their stuff is very much written for the ear. Some of those jokes only work for the ear. They wouldn't work if you saw what was being acted out. They would land differently. So
I'd like to use that if a joke bombs. Oh, if you guys heard that on the radio. You would have enjoyed it. Yeah.
it's just because you're seeing me that it's
Yeah.
not working. That's fair.
Close
All
your
right.
eyes, I'll do it again.
But like I'm going
brave.
through like a lot of old like video that I've had that of even like a DVD that I put out like years ago, and now I'm re-editing it, and with the knowing that it's just going to be an audio CD.
Right. So you gotta pick and choose a little.
Well, I'm going through it again, and then like every part where I'm like talking to an audience member, I'm taking that out.
Okay.
Because if you're watching it, if you're watching on a monitor or something like that, you can be like, oh, well, he's talking to the crowd, blah blah blah. But if you're just listening to it, it doesn't work that
Yeah,
well.
you don't get the context always.
Yeah, and so
Fair
it's
enough.
just so I'm a little bit more conscious of what's going to come across in audio form as opposed to watching it on YouTube or something like that.
Fair enough. Next question. This is fun. When you know that you are bombing, how do you recover?
Sometimes you don't.
Oh man, sometimes you don't. Oh, it's it's one of those fine lines of just like if you are bombing, do you pretend that you're not bombing, or do you call yourself out for it and going, oh man, it's like even in the Steve Martin one, it's like he's like, hey, aren't we having some fun now? Like he can almost do that when he is killing and when he's not killing.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to call yourself out for bombing, then you better also have a way of getting out of it as well. If you've
So what's a good way to get out of it? Just a new joke, or a good
probably-
joke that calls attention to the bombing. Like, do you think do most comics have something in their back pocket. Like if I bomb, I'll say this line.
It
back
depends.
on my side,
It
and then I
depends
move
what
on.
you're bombing with. Sometimes you've gone
Yeah.
too dirty for a corporate older crowd that's not into it,
Right.
and you've got to retract to material they might like. I think addressing the bomb later in your set, I find helps the whole set.
Yeah?
Once you've recovered
Well, that
and
one
got
went
them
better,
back a little
huh?
bit, and then they
They're on your
kind
side
of
again.
humanizes, like, yeah, I understood that didn't go well too. So they're like,
Right.
oh, okay.
And then they're rooting
but
for
also
you.
if you
Not
ignore it,
unaware.
there's always that people in the audience that are going, man, does he not know that was bad? Man, this is going terrible. Does he not recognize
Yeah.
that? And then you also don't want to come across as too well rehearsed because
Right.
then the audience is sort of like,
You
well,
just
do
blow
we even
by
need to be
faster.
here? Because
Yeah.
he's doing horribly,
Yeah.
but he's acting like he's absolutely killing.
Well, then there's people who get totally thrown. They're like, "Oh man, that didn't work." So anyway, wow, what else have I got here? And that's
It
like
depends. It depends
so
how long in
uncomfortable.
your set. I mean, if you've had a really good set and you tell some jokes that closer to the end that maybe don't work, that's not
Yeah.
considered a bomb. But if we're on stage, we do that. You'll come off. You'll be thinking about the parts that didn't go well. Like,
I've
oh,
always
did I have enough
imagined-
time to recuperate after that? What could I have done different? But that's when you go to your notes and you try and
Do
prep for
you
next time.
do you stack your sets? Do you try to start strong, end strong, or sort of ramp up to the end, or what?
I like to
for
start
paid
strong
shows,
and
yeah.
then.
Fizzle out to the point where the crowd's like, what is he even
Well
doing
demonstrated.
here?
Is the best material usually your last joke is the best one? Is that you leave them laughing? Is that the?
It's supposed to be, but
I mean, you want it all to be good, I guess.
yeah.
Right.
I find the first time I tell a joke is usually the best it works. It takes a while to get that back and that natural, like hone it. But if you're being paid to do a show, they don't want you doing a lot of new material. So
Sure.
you've got stuff in the, maybe you can play around in the middle, but you've probably
Okay.
got openings so they like you and they'll listen to
Yeah.
maybe some of your new stuff, and you got to close with something strong. Yeah.
I think open strong and close strong, and then you can screw around in the middle a bit. But I always try to close on something that I can't follow. You know, it's either something going to be so shocking, or some sort of like a physical gag, or I'm doing some big act out on stage that whether it goes well or it doesn't, then that's the end of it.
Next question: if you had to remove a part of this album, which would you choose?
The fact that it ends.
You just
38 minutes is too short.
You think it's too short?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, that
you wouldn't
banjo.
take any. You would take out the parts that
I take out the part where the,
The empty
spindle
part of
goes
it?
up through the middle of the record.
somehow just add more material. You take out the silence and replace it with more of Steve Martin's material.
Yeah.
Somehow? Okay. It's a very surreal answer.
Well,
but-
that's fitting then. It would make more sense if you could see my hands.
it really wouldn't, folks. Katie.
It's just personal. It's not that it wasn't good, but it
The
always
banjo.
irks me when anyone gets people to sing back to them.
Right.
I
But there
hate
also
it.
is one of the. I think that's also one of his jokes
Steve
too.
Martin does
just-
it the best that I've heard, and
Yeah.
it's funny.
I
But
would've
if I was
liked
in the
it-
audience, I prefer listening to it on the audience and on the album than sitting in the audience being told to sing back.
Right.
I just don't participate.
I think
in
I
those.
would
I just hate
have
them.
enjoyed that part better if when he got them to sing, it was a new verse and the lyrics were new. But it felt weird to hear everything a second time.
Yeah.
And then a third time because he says it and they repeat it. So really you hear all of those words 3 times.
Which I feel like
That's
it's kind of
good.
like a joke I don't get at that point, but I just
Yeah.
feel bad for
It's just
everyone
a
in the
silly thing
audience
to
being
do.
like, "Oh, we have to sing now." Just came to hear you tell jokes. All right.
I don't think anybody's disappointed when they're singing along with Steve Martin.
No,
but I
I
don't think
know,
it
I
necessarily
know.
makes for a good album bit. I agree. Dave?
I probably wouldn't take the sing along part out of it. It'd be hard. I mean, he does sort of do the same joke over and over again. I
So
know
what
that's
would
part
you
of his
take
shtick. Was I probably the excessive? Hey, aren't we having some fun now? I know that's his character, and I get
Yeah.
it. But I would also be curious if this was recorded as all one set.
It wasn't.
'Cause- Yeah, I mean that's the thing too. So it's hard
There's
to
some
say-
things that are repeated, like the cost of the ticket being $4. There's
Right.
2 references to that back to back. Yeah, they're
See, 'cause I
from
think-
a couple different shows.
Yeah, I think most comedy albums now it's just from beginning to the show to the end of the show. So, but I
Yeah.
mean, you can definitely tell on this album that there's sort
It's
of
a little bit cut
chunks
together.
placed here and there. So there isn't sort of as I like I said, I would be curious because even in the Steve Martin album, you see all the notes that he used to on the book. Born Standing Up is you can see some of the notes that he used to make, and there's a lot of thought put into like, okay, well, this chunk's going to go here, this chunk's going to go there, and then this chunk's going to go here. So it's kind of weird if he put the album together that way,
right?
How far away is this album from a set that you'd actually go and see?
Right. That flow is interrupted a little bit.
There is a DVD release, Steve Martin on TV, which has his television specials on it, which are a lot of sketch comedy, but also includes his stand-up specials, where you get to see material from shortly after this period, uninterrupted, start to finish. And so you get that continuity that you're talking is missing from this album, but also you get to see a lot of material that isn't on any of his albums.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, that's, if the one thing I could take out is that those parts aren't on this album.
Well, I really love that first thing he did on the Smothers Brothers show where he plays that magician. Like it's a video you can find on YouTube. It's hilarious. He plays this magician that's not great, but he has this same attitude of this showman who's overconfident, and it's very strong. That'd be nice to have on here too. Yeah, I agree. I wish if I could take anything out, it would be that there's not more on the album. Right.
I think if I had to change anything about the album, is just like I wouldn't like. It would be nice if the cuts weren't so obvious.
Yeah, if it was a flow.
The fade out and the fade up, and I mean, maybe I've just become spoiled to the idea of just I want to see an album where it's just one show from beginning to end.
Okay, we got it, Dave.
Please cut Dave's answer in post-production. Just put an awful edit in there.
Right in the middle of it. If there's one thing I wouldn't like, edits. That'll make him so mad.
I'm not listening to this. No.
All right, here's we got two more here. In 1977, when this album was released, we were seeing punk explode as a violent response to the hippie and peace movement. Martin expressed extreme dissatisfaction with the hippie movement and how it sold out its values for sex and drugs. Do you feel that Martin was punk anti-comedy in the way the Clash were punk anti-music? Yes.
This question is a lot of research, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I'd say, well, we talked about anti-comedy before, and Dave, you mentioned that Steve Martin was certainly one of the pioneers of it. I think we should also mention what was going on in Britain with the alternative comedy movement with people like Rick Mayall, Nathan Edmondson, and Alexei Sayle. And
I would say, Python is way before this too, and they would a lot of their stuff is anti-comedy.
And I think so what is punk and what is alternative comedy? Nowadays, you would say those are genres that define a certain style of performance, but back then, I think it was more a labeling for things that didn't have mainstream or access to a mainstream audience. So they were experimenting technically with different ways. It was a response to something versus adhering to genre rules.
Right. It was outside of the norm. It wasn't on the beaten path.
Which makes it punk and makes it alternative. And to go back to that question, not to pivot, but
if you could see his hands, the pivoting would make more sense.
What makes alternative comedy is
so much pivoting.
Playing with the rhythm and playing with expectations. So you have a setup and you have a punchline, and it still exists in an album like what we just listened to, and it still exists in things that Rick Mayall and Alexei Sayle and others of that time were doing, but it's not necessarily where you expect it. So they're destroying audience expectations, but still leaving audience enjoying the show versus just watching. Like, it's still funny. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Fozzie Bear.
Yeah, I feel like he's definitely sort of forging his own path away from other things that are happening, but I don't know if it's necessarily in response to it. I don't know if he's...
I think it definitely was.
You feel like he was... But I don't think he was angry at the comedy that existed, and he... was
maybe not
rebelling
angry,
against it. I think he just really wanted to do his own thing.
He wanted to do his own thing, not in isolation, because he was the most successful stand-up at that time, but he wasn't the first, and there was a thriving culture of it. And you had avant-garde people before him too, like Jonathan Winters.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were breaking the mold all over the place. I don't know what that means.
Albert Brooks is another guy who's amazing. He was an amazing stand-up. He just stopped doing it because he felt like he'd gone But I mean, if you ever listen to Comedy Minus One, there's he almost does purposely. He does He's playing off the whole, a wacky morning DJ sort of like, all right, we got a crazy call coming in right now, and then where he calls like some burger joint, and he's like, all right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask if they can make 1,000 burgers. So let's see what happens. So he calls the place, or he does the bit is he calls the place, and then the guy on the other end is basically like. All right, well, I think we can do that for you. It's going to take a while. You want 1,000 burgers, sir? And then once the DJ realizes that the bit's not going well, he just hangs up. But I mean, it's like a really funny. It's like playing off of like almost like shit that people are making fun of now. Albert Brooks was making fun of then. Even I think he did a spot on the Flip Wilson show where he's this ventriloquist and he gets really nervous, and then the ventriloquist says, "Oh, why don't you have a cigarette? That always calms you down." And then so he basically takes out a pack of cigarettes, but he drops the ventriloquist dummy and it just lays on the floor for the rest of the thing. And it's hilarious, but it's so much. It's playing off that medium really well. So I mean, I don't know. I always have a hard time wrapping my head around the Clash being a punk band because most of the songs I know them for are like all their later albums when they seem pretty polished. I always thought the Sex Pistols never stopped being punk, but they all Sid Vicious died and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, they didn't get a chance.
No, they didn't. Yeah, they couldn't get too famous. But
and this is the second time we've mentioned them on the same thing. But a band like Public Image Limited went on and experimented in even more innovative and avant-garde and non-conventional ways, and continues to. So
yeah, I mean, but it's the same thing with like there's only so long as an artist you can say F you to the industry. And then you basically become popular and you become a part of it.
Yeah, it becomes a little false when you're a millionaire who's succeeded off of this thing and you're now the man.
That's how hip-hop artists evolve that way, too.
But then what are you rebelling or revolting against?
Right.
Because you can still experiment and revolt against what you are repulsed by as being conventional format or formulas. So then you just experiment in different ways. You can't necessarily go up and say, "Oh, I'm so poor."
Right. Yeah.
Not a poor black child anymore. But you can experiment with rebelling against the joke formula.
Right,
or
and I think
or,
he was doing that. Like, I mean, I feel like the question alluded to Steve Martin sort of rebelling against the hippie movement and not being satisfied with the hippies with the peace and love and drugs. But I think to a certain extent he was part of that. I think he was an intellectual, but you don't see a lot of intellectual humor on his albums. He's an intelligent person who's doing silly stuff in a new way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, what is he rebelling against? Like, part of it to me seems like he's rebelling against the stiffness in the confines of comedy, and that I guess you could say that is similar to the punk movement, but I don't necessarily think it's anti-hippie. All right,
but I want to know more about where this question came from. Where's this question? Where'd it go?
It's right here. Here you go.
So,
it wasn't signed. You may never know.
That's okay. But Martin expressed extreme dissatisfaction with the hippie movement. Is that knowledge outside of this album that you know about Steve Martin, or is that coming out of listening to the album?
Right. I thought that
now?
was the character's point of view, but I don't necessarily think it's Steve's point of view.
That's what I want to know.
So in his biography, he was dissatisfied with the hippie movement? I don't recall that paragraph.
Do you feel that
I
Martin
haven't read that part yet.
Okay, we can't speak to that. Fair enough. Last one. This is an easy one. How did Steve's stand-up comedy influence his acting career? I think that's an interesting question because his early films were very much that goofy guy, like the Jerk, Pennies from Heaven.
Bowfinger.
Pennies from Heaven, he's
Sergeant.
definitely not that goofy guy.
What? Oh, wait, sorry, not Pennies from Heaven.
Well, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid.
I get that it confused with The Jerk.
Yeah.
The Jerk, and there was with Sergeant Pepper's. He's when he does the Maxwell Silver Hammer thing.
Yeah.
He plays
Dead Men
Sergeant
Don't
Maxwell.
Wear Plaid.
Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. He plays that a
Man
little
with
straighter.
Two Brains, the
Man with
Only
Two,
Guy.
Yeah, those are way out there
Pink
for
Panther.
sure.
The one bad thing about Steve Martin's career is that he does admit at a certain point that he just starts doing movies for money. It's like the whole Pink Panther series was just like he has a huge, massive art collection, and he's kind of been pretty quick to admit of like, yeah, I just did that so I can buy a couple of masterpieces to put up in my house.
But the question is, how does his stand-up comedy influence his acting career? So I think at the beginning, he was given opportunities that it's sort of like Jim Carrey. I mean, Jim Carrey got Ace Ventura because he's this rubber-faced wacko, and he kind of played himself in his first few movies, or the thing he was famous for. And I guess Steve Martin was sort of the same thing, and then that afforded him new opportunities. And I imagine he rejected a lot of stuff later in his career as he wanted to be taken maybe more seriously. I mean, he started writing his own things too. He wrote, L.A. Story and Roxanne, and
he co-wrote The Jerk.
And Shop Girl.
Yeah.
But I mean, in the Jerk, there's like loads of lines both from this album and Wild and Crazy Guy that show up in. I mean, the first line in The Jerk is, "I was raised as a poor." Well,
yeah.
Well, I think it's a couple minutes into the movie,
couple minutes,
but yeah, it's so. I mean, I think that he both in The Jerk and even a little bit in some of his movies after The Jerk he was like a. He's basically playing the character that was on Wild and in Wild and Crazy Guy,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Let's Get Small.
But then it evolved, and so then what happened?
I would rather than look at about how his stand-up career propelled him into movies, his experience as a performer in front of live audiences doing stand-up would have helped him become an actor with good comic timing and being able to listen and react to fellow actors, even though there's no live studio audience there, to know what is funny and where to just timing.
Yeah. Well, again, I think him working on the Smothers Brothers probably helped with that. Being around amazing writers and their performing was so tight and so well rehearsed. I think he learned that showmanship from them probably.
He's very disciplined. That's what I've learned about him. Throughout every aspect of his life, he seems like to have a lot of discipline. And I think he kind of takes that into films, how he takes care of his audiences. Like you said, how he knows what works well live. He's able to take that into theater and think, I think he's still got the same mindset. Well, that would have worked, in a show. I'm going to try it in the movie, and it works just as well.
Which is a great thing for all performers to be able to do. Marx Brothers did it going into their films, and Charlie Chaplin before that. I think it makes for a stronger, especially in comedy, makes for a stronger comic actor if you've been in front of live audiences.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it works.
Hello.
We have a call. We have a call coming in.
First time caller, long time listener.
One thing I came across recently I didn't know is the movie Three Amigos, which is one of my favorite movies. Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short was originally called The Three Caballeros, and it was going to be Steve Martin, Dan Aykroyd, and John Belushi. And oh my God, would I kill to see that movie? Like, that would be.
Well, I mean, Ghostbusters was supposed to be John Belushi, Eddie Murphy, and Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah. But I just seeing Steve Martin, Dan Aykroyd, and Belushi together would be incredible to me. Amazing. The end. All right. So guys, I want to get your final thoughts on the album succinctly, please. We'll start with you, Dave.
I think this is a great debut album from Steve Martin, and it's the kind of thing where, but I mean, it is also the kind of thing that probably like he'd done a bunch of TV appearances, and he was already an established comic, when he did this record. But it's definitely, I don't know if it's the kind of album that could win someone over. If they heard it for the first time and didn't know anything about Steve Martin. But
what do you love about it?
About this one? I love this album, but I mean, it like I said, I fell in love with Wild and Crazy Guy first, and then heard the first one.
Right.
So it's just like.
You think Wild and Crazy is the better album?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's less banjo on it, and he's also figured. I don't think he's learned him. I think he's also figured himself out a little bit more as a stand-up and in that sort of big performance setting as well.
Fair enough.
And I think he's definitely a lot more comfortable on that album.
Right.
And I think a little bit of his sort of playful awkwardness is genuine, and some of it's just genuinely being awkward as well. So
cool.
I do love this record, but I think it's a great first record from him.
Fair enough. Cool.
But definitely
Katie?
not his best.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I've only really seen snippets of his stand-up. So hearing it as a full album, I really enjoy it. Just from, I know it's not long, but from start to finish. And it just has so many different levels. He just knows how to hit different jokes. I really enjoyed it.
Were you surprised at what you heard based on what you already knew about Steve Martin as seeing the movies he's been in and stuff?
Yeah,
I'm sure you've heard about
he
him.
went darker than I remember from the films and stuff. So I really like that, seeing that he just goes there and then leaps back to like happy, fun stuff. Yeah,
Cool.
I really like that.
Alan, final thoughts?
It makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And it makes me laugh in a very visceral way. It's a hilarious album. And as much as I've listened to it over and over and studied it, it can still get me, which is great. And I do go back and listen to it over and over because it inspires me, and I learn new things from it, even though it's been decades now since it's come out, but it still propels me into the future with my own anti-comedy, playing with the rhythm, et cetera, et cetera.
Is this an album that you listen to more than other albums? Is there stuff that you think Steve Martin's comedy has taught you more than a lot of other comedy? Is there stuff that...
Yeah, because I perform in character. I do character comedy, and I perform very in character as a clown with full makeup. So playing the character without winking at the audience, playing with the idea of failing in character but not failing as the artist under the character so that it's still an enjoyable experience for the audience. Writing discipline, but sounding like it's going on off all the... I'm talking on TV. Sounding like it's going off the rails, and
That's very hard
also
to do.
often I don't write too, and I'm improvising up there, and so trying to ride that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's harder than people realize to write a failure that still works. Right, like to be a bumbler who is still somehow creating something that is funny and worth watching.
Yeah. So when do we make this shirt pile? Because I'm really
We'll
looking
meet you
forward-
out back. You go ahead around back, and we'll be there.
All right, I'm going outside.
Okay,
I'm gonna
thanks,
take off
Alan.
my shirt.
All right, please give a big hand to my guest, Alan Turner. You can find him on Twitter at the Aft End and at Assface Improv. Katie Westman, she is on Twitter at the other K West, and she'll be posting her stand-up date soon. Dave Martin, give a hand for Dave. He's at no_wrong answers for the No Wrong Answers podcast. You can find me at Jason DeLine and the Comedy Album Book Club on Twitter at CABC Podcast. You can also find this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, your favorite app for podcasts, or on our website, comedyalbumbookclub.com, where you can find links to the albums we listen to. You can also go to our Facebook page or Twitter and write us suggestions for albums or ask us questions that we can ask our panelists. Remember, we're here the first Thursday of every month. We're going to be back here February 1st with Dan Hirschfield, and we're doing the 2000 Years with Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. Very classic album. Should be great. Remember to please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And remember that all our proceeds always go to Covenant House, Canada's largest agency for homeless and troubled youth. I'm Jason DeLine. Thanks for joining us for Comedy Album Book Club.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Corient. Corient provides wealth management services centered around you. They focus on exceeding your expectations and simplifying your life. Corient has been helping high achievers just like you enjoy their lives more fully, preserve their wealth, and provide for the people, causes, and communities they care about. As one of the largest integrated fee-only registered investment advisors in the U.S., Corient has deeply experienced teams in 23 strategic locations. Corient has extensive knowledge spanning the full spectrum of planning, planning, investing, lending, and money management disciplines. Leverage Corient's exclusive network of experts to craft custom solutions designed to help you reach your financial goals, no matter how complex they may be. Real wealth requires real solutions. For more information, connect with a wealth advisor today at Corient.com. That's Corient.com. Corient.com. Looks like you need a vacation. Enter the 5-Hour Energy Where Will the Tide Take You sweepstakes. You could win a $10,000 dream beach vacation. Imagine jet setting off to a tropical paradise, having fun in the sun, or diving at a gorgeous reef. It's up to you. No purchase necessary. Go to 5HETide.com for official rules and to enter. That's 5HETide.com. Enter today. Ends June 30th, 2024.